setting up of a national inquiry into child grooming gangs in the UK has descended into chaos. Lots of the survivors who were involved in advising the inquiry have withdrawn because they're not happy about how it's shaping up. And two of the people who were touted as potential chairs have withdrawn because of the criticism that they've faced. We will discuss what is going on and what it means on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Well, we can catch up with Chris, who's at Westminster. Hello, Chris.
Hi.
And also our special correspondent, Judith Moritz. Hi, Judith.
Hi, Adam.
Where are you geographically, Judith?
Glorious Salford.
Okay. Oh, inside in an office for once rather than...
Indoors.
Yes, that makes a change.
Yeah.
Before we dive into the politics of today, I just wonder, Judith, where is a good place to kind of go back to for this story?
Good question. Well, look, let's start, I guess, by just reminding ourselves of why we are in the place we are talking about a national inquiry at all, because you remember all the back and forth about this at the start of this year. The government resisted initially a national inquiry. The plan at the beginning of the year was for there to be local inquiries, 5 local inquiries. But there was a review, an audit commissioned, which was carried out by Baroness Louise Casey. And as part of that, she recommended that there should be a national inquiry. Now, I mean, this is complex, but what she said very clearly at the time was she didn't want it to look like other public inquiries. There have been a raft of different inquiries in the past which touch on this subject, not least, of course, the long-running ICSA, the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse. But there's been a feeling widely accepted that no one's got to grips with the specific issue of grooming gangs. And when Louise Casey looked at this, she was particularly looking at whether or not enough local authorities and regional areas were likely to take up the idea of local inquiries. Only Oldham put its hand up. And she said, I think it needs to be national, but it needs to be local inquiries which feed into a national umbrella, not something which takes on the same form as ICSA, not a judge-led inquiry necessarily, but something new. And you could say, well, maybe that now is why we are where we are, because it's being fought over. The terms of reference, the concept of who will chair this, what it'll look like, how it will all run, that's up for grabs. That's what's being debated. And clearly, people are falling out over it.
And also, Chris, just the politics throughout this year, the way the government was sort of justifying this and saying it wasn't a U-turn was that they'd put in place a process under Louise Casey that could have led to this outcome, and they were just following the process, and Louise Casey changed her mind about whether to have a national inquiry, so therefore it's okay for the Prime Minister to change his mind. And also, as Judith was saying, this wasn't a repeat of the big child abuse inquiry. This is a quite targeted thing. And also, I remember at the time Louise Casey saying so much of it was just about forcing different local agencies and different bits of local government to actually talk to each other in a way that a local inquiry couldn't do.
Yeah, there's been a kind of arc to this political argument going back to the beginning of the year, and the Prime Minister's trying to make the case that he has followed a kind of logical procedure, if you like, even if it has taken some time, with the work that Baroness Casey did earlier in the year. And then that decision, I remember I was with the Prime Minister on a plane on the way to the G7 summit in Canada when he told us in the middle of a Saturday afternoon, I think it was, that there would be this statutory inquiry, and that it would, I've just been looking back at my notes actually from that day, 14th of June, setting it up will take a bit of time, he said. Well, that's definitely turned out to be the case. And then now the politics around what it amounts to and who chairs it. And I'm struck, Adam, and we can talk about how it came up at Prime Minister's Questions, because it was the dominating exchanges between the Prime Minister and Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader. But taking half a step back from it and just reflecting on what Judith was saying, I'm struck that at the heart of this, the government is having to wrestle, and in public, with the reality of the utterly bleak nature of this, and the fact that at its heart are victims who have been let down in the most profound way by agencies of the state. And you now have a government attempting to grapple with this and set up an infrastructure an inquiry that can attempt to get to some answers. But in so doing, yeah, of course, is dealing with a range of people who have been persistently let down, some of whom are then now not happy with the process that's underway. And the nature of that is then playing out in real time, whilst the government is still trying to go about trying to find the right person to lead it, conscious that they'll want to ensure that when a decision is taken, firstly, as the Prime Minister acknowledges, perhaps not everyone will be happy, but that also that person is up for the longevity of the challenge ahead, so that this isn't a recurring problem for everyone involved in this, where they might have to come back and find somebody else.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the appointment of the chair in a second, and also how it played out at Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday lunchtime. But first, Judith, just in terms of the victims and survivors who've been on the panel advising during the setting up of this inquiry, we've now got a situation where, well, as we're recording on Wednesday evening, 4 people have withdrawn from that panel, but equally a few people on the panel have come forward saying they disagree with some of the people who've withdrawn. Yeah,
it's clear that there's a division of opinion, that not everybody has the same view, that all survivors have the same view. I think that's to be expected. You know, whenever I've covered stories in the past, very different to this, but public inquiries or legal processes involving survivors and victims of difficult situations, attacks, tragedies, whatever, you will find it's a mistake to take the view that everyone has the same opinion. And I don't know whether that was perhaps a naive assumption here amongst officials who were looking at this. You know, let's take a sounding board of some views of different survivors, and we should then be able to tick that box and move on. But certainly I've been speaking to survivors of grooming gangs over the last couple of days. Particularly I've heard of Fiona Goddard, who's been very vocal. She's waived her right to anonymity, and she was the first person to resign. Others, by the way, who haven't given up their right to anonymity. And I think that is another thing to just mention here, is it makes it difficult to get a sense of how many survivors at the moment are closely plugged into this process, because you know, there are people who are keeping their anonymity. We don't know everybody who's involved. Some of those have come out vocally, have chosen to do that. Others are quietly, you know, getting on with it, either staying involved or perhaps not, or considering pulling out. It's hard to get a sense of the full scale.
But the two issues that the division seems to be around is, first of all, the scope of the inquiry, to use a very civil servant's word, like how many things and different issues this would actually look at, and then the personnel, who's going to run it.
Yeah, and I think so. The scope, first of all. You know, if you ask me for my take on that, it's. I think when I'm talking to these survivors, they're saying, look, we don't understand why this is even a subject for debate, because when Louise Casey recommended it, she recommended it as a national inquiry into grooming gangs. Full stop. Laser focus. This subject only. We don't need a broad-based inquiry, they say. That's what ICSA was. We've been there, and there wasn't enough focus on the specifics of this subject. Now, why are they worrying about this being too broad brush? Well, I've seen notes that were shown to me from the agenda of one of the meetings that the survivors had, part of the panel process, before this inquiry even gets going, these consultation process conversations happening. And one of the questions they were being asked was, should this inquiry have an explicit focus on grooming gangs or group-based CSEA, or should it take a broader approach? And the fact they were even being asked that question offended some of them. They felt that that was something which had already been settled by Louise Casey in her recommendation. And even if the terms of reference for this inquiry are still being hammered out, they feel that shouldn't be one of the things which is at issue. So that's why they're saying it's too broad brush. We're worrying about it. The identity of the chairperson is a whole other conversation. And there you'll know that the two prospective candidates we know about, both of whom have now withdrawn, one a former police officer, the other a former social worker. There's an argument that there are some survivors saying that's too close to home. Social services, police forces are two of the main agencies we know have failed. They shouldn't be providing former members of staff to chair an inquiry like this. There's other survivors who are very happy with that kind of arrangement because they feel it's relevant. It brings relevance to the process. So there's that again is somewhere that people are disagreeing.
And Judith, the former police officer you referred to there was Jim Gamble, who was also previously the boss of something called CEOP, the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Safety Centre. Pops up on the news talking about these issues quite often. I've interviewed him loads of times, and he was on the news channel today, and he actually had some quite harsh words for the political system as a whole.
All you have to do is to scan Twitter or to watch any of the parliamentary debates on this to see the level of adversarial approaches that are being taken, rather than politicians think, look, we've got the opportunity of a generation to do the right thing for these children and young people, these survivors of this awful abuse. People are using it instead for party political point scoring opportunities. That's just not acceptable. And what it does is it misinforms and misdirects so many people. And I worry that victims and survivors who watch this are left with a feeling that this is never going to be resolved.
Yeah, so Chris, what's your take on just the politics of this today, this week, this year?
It's inevitable, I think. You know, I'm always conscious. You think of so many issues where there will be a desire perhaps that things don't become political, the politics can be taken out of it. And my instinct, having kicked around this postcode at Westminster for a long time, is that the politics is inevitable, particularly when issues are as fraught and inevitably lead to strong feelings. PMQs today dominated, as I say, by this issue. At least the main exchanges of Prime Minister's questions between Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer. And Kemi Badenoch accusing the government of engaging in a briefing war against survivors, which really annoyed and I think upset some Labour front and backbenchers. The Prime Minister acknowledging that these are the hard yards in the context of getting things up and running, and an acknowledgement of the bumps of the last few days, but insisting that the scope won't be diluted and the inquiry won't shy away from cultural and religious issues, and then pushing back against the claims that some have suggested that it's a cover-up. From what I hear within government, they know, as the Prime Minister acknowledged publicly, that this is difficult and that these are the hard yards, but that in their view, getting the casting right the first time is absolutely key, so that this doesn't develop into something that critics could suggest was a kind of rolling mess, really, and that if it takes some bumps at the start, it might be worth it in order to get something up and running that is sort of believed and trusted. And on the particular nature of who you get to run it, to chair it, the Prime Minister pushing back against the argument that some have made, including the Conservatives, that it should be judge-led. The Prime Minister pointing back to what Dame Louise Casey said, which is that if you go down that route, the danger is that you can't run, or you're less likely to have, simultaneously running police inquiries. And the government, I think, very keen that this gets up and running by the relative speed of these things quite quickly, and that you can do that if it's not led by a judge in a way that might not happen if it were to be.
And Judith, in terms of speed and trying to keep the ball rolling while they look for a permanent chair, guess who's come back? Louise Casey. She's now going to be involved in even more in setting this thing up. So it sort of feels like there's still some momentum.
Yeah, although not the suggestion that she would chair it. And actually, from the get-go, when she made that recommendation back in June, and I spoke to survivors then and said, who would you like to get involved? Who do you want to chair this? They said, Louise Casey, please. It is... Look, there are some uncomfortable reminders here of ICSA, because you'll remember that inquiry went through 3 chairwomen before the 4th, Professor Alexis Jay, took the reins. Nobody wants to see teething problems here of that ilk. But, normally when I cover public inquiries like the Manchester Arena inquiry, the Southport attack inquiry, which is running at the moment, or the Thirlwall inquiry into the Lucy Letby situation at the hospital in Chester, those follow the same kind of path generally. The inquiry is announced, the chairperson's appointed, the terms of reference are set, and then, although there is consultation generally with stakeholders, with victims and survivors, things get going relatively seamlessly because the parameters are well established from the beginning. They have to be before the hearings can start. This was never going to be a public inquiry in that mould. Louise Casey said she didn't want that. And so it was always, I think we always expected there to be challenges. The question is going to be, as Chris has just said, can they overcome those in short order to be able to get this going underway, and crucially, with the confidence of the people who've been calling for it for so many years.
And also, Judith, just picking up on your last point there about previous inquiries, you've got to remember these are usually quite time-consuming, painstaking things, and quite often that conflicts with the strong emotions and people's desire for justice or a solution or an answer, because they've been going through this for years, decades even.
Yeah, which is why actually the case management, if you like, the terms of reference, the structure of the thing is so critical, because even if it's going to take a long time, if there's focus and purpose and people can understand the rationale behind that and see that it is proceeding, if you like, in the right direction, you'll carry that confidence of those involved along with you. It's where things perhaps feel amorphous, not quite set in stone yet. Nobody quite knows how this is going to work. I think at this stage, it feels that confidence is ebbing away, but it's there to be regained. And I'm saying that actually only, of course, in relation to the survivors I've been speaking to who've pulled out. We mustn't forget there are others still very much on board. And so, where are we going to net out? Ultimately, they need to keep the confidence of as many of those people as possible.
Judith, thank you very much.
Thanks.
And Chris, thanks to you too.
Cheers.
Now, why we should all care about the soaring price of orange juice. Although actually there's signs that it might stop soaring, or has stopped soaring in the last few months. Faisal Islam, BBC economics editor, has written a fantastic essay for the BBC in-depth section of the website, where he has taken apart, nay, unpeeled all the reasons why we should care about this breakfast staple. And Faisal is on Newscast down the line right now. Hello, Faisal. And Faisal is here. Hello.
Hello, Adam.
I actually read your long read on the BBC News website
Actually?
over breakfast. No, I don't mean I wasn't suggesting I'd actually read it. I mean, I actually read it over breakfast. But I'm not really an orange juice consumer.
Okay.
So I only have it when I check into a hotel and I've got breakfast included.
Okay, well that's good. Yeah, no, it's the fact that it's such a staple, and that we all know what's in it. Well, kind of up to a point. That's so simple that makes it quite a nice way to track inflationary pressures everywhere around the world. So yeah, it was a great idea to just try and take the example of one product.
And in terms of prices, what are we looking at?
Oh, they've gone up hugely. I mean, everyone does notice it. And it's the sort of, they call it the sticker shock in the shops, but it's kind of cafe shock with glass shock. But yeah, if you're talking about kind of standard carton, a fairly basic orange juice, well below £1, 70-80p 5 years ago, now £1.70, £1.80, £2. So that's kind of more than double. The more sort of natural sound, sort of bit with bits in it, pure 100%. There's all different varieties, and that's part of the issue. They've gone up 30, 40, 50% over 5 years. A lot of that has happened over the past 12 months for reasons we will get into. But yeah, it slightly depends on what type of orange juice, but there's some common factors.
Well, there's loads of factors that we can unpick or unpeel, seeing as we're talking about oranges. First of all, let's talk about just the structure of the global orange market. Why is that important here?
Well, it really matters, and it's because oranges are such a simple product, and although obviously we can't grow them here, there's a large belt of the centre of the world where they can be grown because of the climate. You would expect that even if it was problem in one particular area, they'd make up for it somewhere else. That hasn't happened. Orange production is hugely concentrated on one country, which is Brazil. That is not an accident. If you look at the history, that's the result of the kind of cultivation of Brazil by the US multinationals that created the orange juice market. It was America that created, if you like, and commoditized orange juice. And that stems back to World War II, where they were specifically looking, the US kind of army scientists, for ways to send out vitamin C to the troops, and didn't quite make to them on time. But actually, older newscasters may remember, or even have the kind of the rations, orange was a key part of what was called welfare foods, the creation of the welfare state in the UK. But then eventually Minute Maid it commercializes its orange juice after the war. It booms in America. It becomes part of the American dream. It becomes a health drink. It becomes particularly fed to children. And in particular, they cultivate Brazil. They develop Brazil as the market as the source to essentially serve the market in the US, and it goes global. And now, though, that started to reverse as people question the health benefits in terms of the amount of sugar. But in areas of the developing world that are becoming more middle class and having breakfast and want to feel in their way sophisticated with a bit of intimacy, consumption's going up. Whereas in areas of the developed world where they're thinking about sugar levels, it's going down. Actually, in the UK, it's still going up. So that's the broad structure of the market, but it's very concentrated on Brazil, very dependent on Brazil. And in Brazil, there's been this disease called citrus greening that's taken out in some parts 2/3. Not taken out, it's kind of greatly reduced the crop in 2/3 of the trees. And then on top of that, you've had hurricanes and the effects of climate change and production in Florida, which is the home of this stuff, down at Great Depression levels.
And there's a bit of a Trump trade tariff angle.
There is. That has complicated matters, and it kind of goes in different directions on different days. Clearly, the Canadians saw orange juice as a sort of seminal totemic product that they could hit back on. Justin Trudeau, the former Prime Minister, said, we're going to have to get used to not drinking so much Florida orange juice. They slapped a big tariff on it. In any event, even maybe before the tariff, demand for Florida orange juice went down in Canada as a sort of patriotic kind of push. They also tried to use it against Brazil. But this is interesting because it shows the limits of this. They were going to put 50% on everything from Brazil because of some of the problems that Donald Trump has with the Brazilian government, the left-wing government in Brazil. But they couldn't do it in the end because it would have been so seminal, so totemic on the American breakfast table had this tariff been passed through, and it ended up being 10%. But that's also played havoc with the price, which is fed through eventually into the supermarket shelf prices that we discussed before.
And then there's just how the price rises are passed on to us, the consumer, because it's not a straight line from the increasing cost of the raw materials to increasing cost on the shelf.
Absolutely. And it raises questions about the stickiness of prices. So I described it run up hugely. It has actually fallen back now as the crop in Brazil does okay. That has not filtered through into the shops. There's 2 or 3 reasons for that. Firstly, it's just, and you have to talk to people actually buying the product at this point. The graphs don't do it justice. And they talk about the panic of trying to buy this orange and get it out of Brazil, and there wasn't enough in Brazil, and they paid the top dollar. Even though it went up to, to the equivalent of $5 per kilo, which is normally 1 to 2, they were paying $7 because they just needed it. They can't not have it, and they couldn't get it out of Florida. So you have So what do? They stockpile this frozen stuff because they take the water out, they freeze it, they send it around the world in big green drums. Who knew? And then they couldn't take it, and then they have to use it. They have to use all that stuff they paid $7 for. So that's a factor. Then you have to, the supermarkets maybe held their prices when they were paying more, and now they maybe need to make some of that back. Maybe in general, the consumer has got used to paying £2 and not £1 for basic orange juice, £4 and not £3 for pure orange juice. And if you're a producer, you think, maybe I should accommodate this new price point rather than wind things back to where they are. So what you're seeing is different blends, you're seeing different sizes, you're seeing a sort of a reinvigoration of it as an attempted health drink. And in particular, and I didn't notice this until I noticed it really, I thought the proliferation of like orange with apple, orange with mandarin, orange with clementine, I just thought that was like being cool, like flavors, but it's like totally economic. Oh, everything's economic, Adam, but like this is even more economic. It's a cheaper way of getting the same level of sweetness, because I think people might notice, I'm interested to know what newscasters think, that the sort of average normal plain orange juice is less sweet than you may have remembered 3 or 4 years ago, and that's a direct result of some of the factors that we've seen.
And also, you hinted at this earlier in the conversation that actually there's a generation of people, and also just various groups of people, who are a bit more skeptical of the health benefits of orange juice, and so that changes the market as well.
Yeah, so back in the day, around the Second World War, when this was developed, they were trying to fight scurvy, and it was vitamin C, and that was the genius sort of medicine that you drank that was also fulfilling. Now, of course, sugar, obesity, there's been a backlash, and in particular, kids that maybe 25 years ago would have ordinarily had orange juice every morning at breakfast aren't getting it for health reasons, and so are not developing a habit.
It's so interesting though, because I've just made a note of all the factors that contribute to the price changes of just one product. And basically you've gone through the structure of the market for the commodity globally, then like external biological factors like whether there's a disease or an earthquake or a flood or a fire somewhere that affects the raw materials. Then you've got the trade policy of individual countries, particularly America. Then you've got the factors in the shop, like how much are they also having to pay on, I don't know, increased national insurance contributions for their staff, and how much product have they got. Then you've got how the producers are dealing with it, and actually do they have stuff they have to get rid of or stuff they have to replace. And then you've just got the fact that we're in a giant global market now, and so the tastes of the middle classes in India and China have an impact on what products we have in the shelves in the UK and how much those products cost. That's kind of like 6 things that then get boiled down to one number, which is the inflation in one particular food item.
No, absolutely, and we see similar things in other commodities. And I think the general thing for me is like, why now that the global market price has fallen, not quite. The pattern we're seeing is we see a big run up in commodities prices, partly during the pandemic and after lockdown, obviously during the energy crisis, and then a bit more over the past year. And in many cases, that has fallen back. We've seen that in things like cocoa, we've seen that in other areas, but the prices are not adjusting. So people quite rightly at home are thinking, are we going to get back to normal? And I'm trying to explain some reasons why they have not. That said, I think there's a reasonable argument now, we're getting to the point now with retailers and with the supermarkets where customers will start to question, well, hang on, you should really be passing on some of these price changes back to us so we can feel it in our pockets. It may just be, and as it happens, the food price inflation numbers did come down a bit more than expected this morning. They're still pretty high, but they have come down.
Having just said like there are loads of factors about why you shouldn't just boil things down to one number. I mean, we have boiled things down into one number today in the world of journalism and politics, which is the inflation number, which is 3.8%, according to the Office for National Statistics. So it's kind of lower than people were expecting this month, and there's consequences of that. But I mean, it means that prices are still going up by on average 3.8%.
Yeah. So what place is it in? That's not great. It's nearly double the target. It's higher than the G7 peers. It's not where you'd want it to be. But markets factor all that in already, right? And then you're like, what's the direction of travel now? And so a surprise, even what would appear to be a modest surprise, so we thought it would go to 4% or above. That was the expectation, and it stayed at 3.8%. Has people questioning the dominant narrative. And the dominant narrative that had emerged over the past couple of weeks is the UK is starting to look like an outlier on inflation. And there's maybe something problematic in the stickiness of the economy. Is it that the tax rises have been passed on? Is it, what is it there? Do we have to treat Britain differently? And I think this starts to say, well, okay, maybe we don't. Maybe there was just a bit of a bump. Maybe this is all going to be okay. So a market is just a bunch of opinions which fight against each other, and so that one today seems to be a bit more dominant. And the expression of that, I would say, the proof point here is that the markets are now starting to think, actually, the inflation outlook is going to go down from here. Food prices, they say, may well have peaked now. Food price inflation, sorry. And therefore, the Bank of England now, having ummed and ahed the markets over whether this is going to happen, might just have the space for a further rate cut this year. That Andrew Bailey might be tempted to don his Santa hat and give a rate cut to the country in December. And that, in turn, something we've talked about loads, Adam, has led to the market rates for government borrowing to continue their downward fall in a way that, is now notable.
Oh, and just before I let you go, another food-related news story today, which is that Penguin biscuits, they can't call them chocolate covered anymore.
Yeah. Well,
and I know you've been at the dentist recently, so maybe this is not the most appropriate. Orange juice to start, and then a chocolate flavored biscuit to end. But
I have been at the dentist. This is true. This is, if you like, inflation. Hidden inflation expresses itself in the size of your goods, but also now in the labelling of the goods. And in this case, cocoa prices have spiraled. I think from something like $3,000 up to $11,000-$12,000 per. Oh, I've forgotten which metric unit it is now. But anyway, the chart is extraordinary, and I think it was more expensive than copper and crude oil at one point per gram. It's fallen back again. It's halved. It's still much higher than it was. And the net result is how they respond to that, the manufacturers, is they cut the cocoa content, and they've cut it below the threshold for what counts as chocolate, which I think is 20 to 25%. And it depends, Brexit, whether we're in the UK or the EU. But so it doesn't count as chocolate, and it's now chocolate flavoured.
These conversations always remind me of the time I bought a jar of cinnamon in the corner shop and I dropped it on the way home. And I just thought, if I was a medieval spice merchant, my entire business would have been destroyed by this jar of cinnamon falling on the floor. And only half of it fell out. And then I stopped in another shop on the way home and bought a tiny little jar to decant what was left into, thinking that I've probably saved millions per ton.
No, you're sounding like me in pine nuts. Pine nuts. I was trying to. My other half was trying to make some pesto, and said we need to buy some pine nuts, and I couldn't. But it didn't make sense making the pesto. The pine nuts are like they're like little golden nuggets. They're extremely expensive. So anyway, there's a top cooking tip as well as an economic tip.
I'm feeling a whole new newscast basket of goods coming on: pine nuts, cinnamon. Chocolate flavored drinks, biscuits,
chocolate orange,
orange concentrate, orange not concentrate. Anyway, Faisal, thank you very much.
Great to see you.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back with another one very soon. Bye-bye.